Hi everyone, so we are going to be looking at chapter 1 of our new novel, The Family Under the Bridge, and make sure you're listening because I'm going to be talking about some of the things that are going to come up in your study guide or novel packet, whatever you want to call it. Remember, those are in your orange folder that are in your crate, okay? Remember, whatever we get done with, put back where you found it, put it back in your crate, and you don't have to worry about it. So make sure you're listening closely to what I'm talking about today because I'm going to give you lots of hints and advice on the questions that might be tricky for you in that packet. Okay, so let's get started on chapter 1. It's on page 1. And if you see the camera messing up, that's thank you to Mr. Loki. Okay, so let's get started. You can see this picture on the first page. This right here is going to be our main character that we're going to talk about. And let's see what you think about this picture for a second. Take a second, look at it. She's obviously not happy about something, but let's see what's going on in this picture. So you infer on what you think's going to happen, and then let's see if we're right, okay? All right, chapter 1. Once there was an old hobo named Armand who wouldn't have lived anywhere but in Paris. So that is where he lived. Everything that he owned could be pushed around in an old baby buggy without any hood, so he had no worries about rents or burglars. All the ragged clothing he owned was on his back, so he didn't need to bother with trunks or dry cleaners. It was easy for him to move from the hidey hole to another, so that is what he was doing one late morning in December. So remember, we talked about setting a lot. So now we know it's late in the morning in a December in Paris, okay? It was a cold day with a gray sky hanging on the very chimney pots of Paris. But Armand did not mind because he had a tickly feeling that something new and exciting was going to happen to him today. He hummed a gay tune to himself as he pushed his buggy through the flower market at the side of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Remember, we talked about the use of different words then, and gay in this one means happy, okay? The flowers reminded him that someday it would be spring even though it wasn't bad winter yet. There were pots of fragile hydrangeas and tulips crowded together on planks in front of the stalls. There were pink carnations and oleanders in great tin pails, but all of these were bouquets of red beaded holly, clumps of white pearled mistletoe, and little green fir trees because it would soon be Christmas. Armand's keen eye caught sight of a pile of broken branches and wilted flowers swept away from one stall. Annabelle was the name written on the stall, and Armand touched his black beret and to the stocky woman whose blue work apron hung below her woolly coat. So he's wearing this little black beret, and when it says he touched it, it's kind of like when they used to tip their hat. But if you touched it, it's kind of the same thing. That's what they mean by that. By your leave and in gratitude to your generosity, madam, he said to the woman who was surely Annabelle. He piled the broken branches on top of his belongings in the baby buggy. Then he fastidiously picked a sprig of dried holly from his litter and pulled it through his torn buttonhole. He wanted it to look his best for whatever gay adventure was waiting for him this day. So he said, let's look at what that quote was. By your leave and in gratitude for your generosity. So then he piled up these sticks. So what he was saying there was, if you don't mind, I'm going to take these sticks. If you don't need them, thank you so much for being so kind. He didn't really wait for a response, and he kind of asked, but in a roundabout way. So he was like, thanks for being so kind. I'm going to help myself to these sticks. And then off of one of the sticks, he pulled off this little piece of mistletoe and stuck it through a buttonhole in his shirt to kind of look like a little pennant or little boutonniere of flowers because he wanted to look his best. The woman, who must have been Annabelle, only frowned at Armand as he trundled his buggy toward the Rue de Cruz. Past the ancient buildings, he shuffled his buggy, headed for the far branch of the Seine River. But as he entered the square in front of Notre Dame, a hand grasped his arm from behind. "Your fortune, monsieur," wielded a musical voice. "You will meet with adventure today." Armand let go of the handle of the buggy and whirled around to face a gypsy woman in a short fur coat and full flowered skirt. He gave her a gap-toothed smile. "You, Muriel," he greeted her. "Your people are back in Paris for the winter." So that kind of tells us that he knew who this person was, right? He turned around, he recognized her. The gypsy woman's dark face beamed under the blue scarf. "Doesn't one always spend the winters in Paris?" she asked, as if she were a woman of fashion. "But have you taken to the streets so early?" Armand shrugged his shoulders under the long overcoat that almost reached to his ankles. "It's back under the bridge for me," he answered. "I've had enough of the crowded corners and tight alleys at the Place Marbert, and I'm tired of sorting rags for that junk dealer. I'm ready for that adventure you're promising me." Merely could understand. "That courtyard we rent sometimes feels like a cage after the freedom of the long winding roads," she said, "but the men have found plenty of work for the winter. A city with as many restaurants as Paris has more than enough pots and pans to be mended." Of course, the children can talk of nothing but the fields and the woods of spring. Sorry, I put something over. "I can't abide children," grumped Armand. "Starlings they are. Witless, tittering little pests." So a starling is actually a type of bird. It was a little black, dark bird that was sometimes seen as a pest, okay? A pest is something that you don't really want around, okay? So he's calling children these starlings, saying that they're a pest. Merely shook her finger at him. "You think you don't like children," she said, "but it is only that you are afraid of them. You are afraid the sly little things will steal your heart if they find out you have one." So she's saying you don't really dislike children. You're afraid that they're going to find out how sweet you are and how kind you are, and then you're going to get attached, and then they're going to steal your little heart away. Armand grunted and took the handle of the buggy again. Merely waved him away, swaying on the bare feet squeezed into tarnished silver sandals. "If you change your mind about the bridge, you can come to live with us," she invited. "We're beyond the halls where they're tearing down the building near the old Court of Miracles." Armand tramped under the black, leafless trees and rounded the cathedral by the riverside without even giving it a glance. In the green park behind the flying buttress, some street urchins were loitering. That means kind of just like hanging around or trying to sell something or talking, things like that. Two of them played at dueling, while a third smaller one watched munching a red apple. The swordsmen, holding out imaginary swords, circled each other. Closer and closer came the clenched fists. Then the boys forgot their imaginary swords and began punching each other. They stopped their play as Armand went by. "Look at the funny old tramp," one cried to his playmates. Remember, we talked in class what a tramp means in this book. It was referred to a old beggar, so someone that was begging for something or was homeless, things like that. Armand looked around because he wanted to see the funny old tramp too. It must be that droll Lois with his tall black hat and baggy pants. Then he realized that he was the funny old tramp. "Keep a civil tongue in your head, starling," he ordered. He fingered the holly in his lapel. "If you don't, I'll tell my Father Christmas about your rude manners. Then you'll get nothing but a bunch of sticks like these on my buggy." So, Father Christmas is the French comparison, is what the French call Santa Claus. We call him Santa Claus, they call him Father Christmas. So he said, if you don't mind your manners, I'm going to tell Father Christmas, or Santa Claus, and you'll get nothing but sticks for Christmas. The boys looked at him with awe. Father Christmas is the Santa Claus of France. He rides down from the north on his little gray donkey and leaves presents for good children. The small boy held out his half-eaten apple. "Are you hungry, monsieur?" he asked. "Would you like the rest of this apple?" But the biggest boy mockingly punched the air with his fist. "Poof," he scoffed. "There's no Father Christmas. He's just make-believe." "If you doubt my word," said Armand with dignity, "just take a look at the Louvre store. You'll find him on the mezzanine floor." He grinned like one of the rockish gargoyles on the cathedral. So a gargoyle was kind of like a monstrous looking thing made out of stone that was put on buildings. There really was a Father Christmas, and it was his friend Camille, who felt the urge to work when the weather turned cold. "I believe you, monsieur," said the boy with the apple. "I saw Father Christmas outside the store yesterday. He was eating hot chestnuts on the street." Armand hunched his shoulders and quickly walked toward the bridge. Mirely was right. These starlings would steal your heart if you didn't keep it well hidden, and he wanted nothing to do with children. They meant homes and responsibility and regular work, all the things he had turned his back on so long ago, and he was looking for adventure. So, this kind of tells us he turned his back on work and responsibilities because he didn't mind not having those things, right? Down a few blocks was the bridge under which he lived when the weather wasn't too raw, and plenty of company he had during the summer with all the homeless of Paris asking their claims and to this space or that. "But first I must have dinner," he told himself, looking up at the restaurant across the street. He licked his thumb and held it up. The wind was just right, he decided. So he parked his buggy beside the low wall and settled himself in the breeze that came from the restaurant. He pulled all the kitchen smells deep into his lungs. "Ah, steak broiled over charcoal," he gloated, "and the sauce is just right." But they scorched the potatoes. For 2 hours, Armand sat on the curb enjoying the food smells because it was the length of time a Frenchman allows himself for lunch in the middle of the day. So over in France, they actually get 2 hours for lunch, which is way different than what we have here. But he allowed himself to sit there. He wasn't actually eating food. He was smelling the food from the restaurant and imagining it in his head. Then he daintily wiped his whiskered lips with the cuff and rose to his knobby shoes. "And just keep the change, waiter," he said generously, although there wasn't a white uniformed waiter in sight. "You'll need it for Christmas." He started down the steps that dropped from the street to the quarry beside the Seine. He bounced the back wheels of the buggy down each step. "I am really quite stuffed," he told himself, "but I wish I had taken that apple. It would have been the right dessert after such a rich sauce." Down the quarry, he pushed the buggy toward the bridge tunnel that ran along the shore. On the cobble quarry, a man was washing his car with the free Seine water. A woman in a fur coat was airing her French poodle. So the Seine is a waterway in Paris. A long barge, sleek on the black steel, slid through the water. It was coming home after a long absence, thought Armand, and anything exciting could happen under a Paris bridge. As he neared the tunnel, his eyes widened with surprise and anger. A gray canvas was propped over the niche that had always been his own. So there was this canopy and tent-looking thing where he always slept in the winter. And a market pushcart was parked by the pillar. He raced his buggy across the cobblestones toward the arch. Then, when he arrived there, he reached up and angrily tore down the canvas with one swoop of his arm. Then he jumped back in surprise and horror. "Ooh la la," he cried, "starlings, a nest full of them!" Because 3 startled children snuggled into a worn quilt looked up at him with eyes as surprised as his own. The little girl and the boy cowered deeper into the quilt, but the older girl quickly jumped to her feet. She had direct blue eyes, and they matched her determined chin, and snub nose and bright red hair. "You can't take us away," she cried, clenching her fists. "We're going to stay together because we're a family, and families have to stick together. That's what Mama says." Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. I want you guys to get out your packets, and on the front page, you have 8 questions that you need to answer, take a picture of, and turn in. But you also need to do the vocab page for chapter 1 and turn that in. I want you to look at these pictures. You're drawing a line connecting the picture to the correct word, okay? So up here, this is the cathedral, okay? Notre Dame. This is the Louvre. And then these other 3, I want you to try to figure out. These 2 were kind of hard to see the picture of. The bottom one is a waterway. The second one is a stone, monstrous looking thing. Okay? Now I want you to look at the definitions at the bottom. So you should be able to tell. Make sure you pay attention. Some are adverbs, some are nouns, some are adjectives. We talked about what a starling is. A quarry is kind of like, we talked about how it's cobblestone. It was up against that waterway. That will help you. So just do your best. Make sure you turn in your pictures and you put these things back where you found them so that you have them for the rest of this time. Thanks, class.